Hello, and welcome back to the Psych and Business Podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. All right, so today I'm really happy to welcome back Jamie Ramsden, the CEO of Adastra Consulting, which is a really cool name. He's also the author of Let's Go, How Great Leaders Shape the Future. Now, if you've not heard Jamie's initial episode, I highly suggest that you go back and listen to it because he has such an interesting life story that I think you should really hear. So today, what we're going to be doing, though, is focusing on Jamie's new model. Now, if you know me, you know that I am a lifelong learner. I love to learn new things. So I really appreciate Jamie coming back to do a deep dive into his model and help us all understand the underlying human needs that a leader speaks to, what it looks like if a leader doesn't have these things, and how we can all develop these capabilities. So Jamie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Ernest. It's a real pleasure to be back.
Jamie, I'm so glad to have you back and to jump into this. I want to start by asking why, right? Let's ask why do we need this model and how is it going to help leaders shape the future?
Yeah. Well, I think, the why is answered by how this came about, right? So I think last time I spoke about, I specialized in leadership and change management when I did my master's. And, at the time I was trying to work towards something that could be universal in timeless, a leadership model that could actually apply in many different circumstances. And so just as a guide, because the power of leadership, we've all seen it, right? When it works really well, we've all been a part of that team or we've all seen it the outside. And so, and what I felt at the time was that we didn't really have a good model that said, okay, how do I do it? Like, how do I as an individual develop my leadership capabilities? And so, I did the research at the time. I read all the books. I did the interviews. I had the time to develop this thesis. And from grounded theory, I was able to, focus on 4 different dimensions where leadership occurs, and then how a leader can adapt or evolve themselves in those areas to be the best that they can possibly be. And of course, that entails unlocking the best out of the people around them.
Yeah. I love that approach, the way that you've done the research, you've done the work. Let's jump right into it because, I love leadership and I love understanding more and more about leadership. So walk us through the model and help us understand how this applies in the workplace.
Yeah. And so 4 dimensions of leadership, that's what the book is based on. The 4 dimensions of leadership are around the individual, the team, the context, and the mission. And in my mind, these can apply just as easily to community leadership that we might see, in your local environment, as well as something more grandiose, government or in organizations, the things that we might read on TV. But this is something that is, and this came out of my research when I spoke to people about what do great leaders look like for you. More often than not, they were talking about people outside of your workplace. And so I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. Like, leadership is a common theme. And sometimes we lead and sometimes we follow. It depends on the context. We all have the ability to be able to develop. And so the underlying premise behind this is that we give up something to our leaders when we are led. We have to give up something. And so the why is, what are we giving it up for, right? And ultimately, at the very end of this, it will be about, I'll talk about how we are, we're trying to connect with something that's bigger than ourselves. We're trying to pass on a legacy that outstrips anything that we could accomplish individually, because if not, you don't have to lead. You can go and do whatever you want to do on your own. But when we galvanize a group of people to build a better future, that's when we're leading. That's when we can leave a legacy that's bigger than ourselves. And so related to those 4 dimensions of the individual, the team, the context, and the mission are these underlying senses or underlying drivers that we have as human beings today, and that we've had as human beings since, the beginning, the first time that we all came together as a collective, which is our sense.
Jamie, I understand when you say the individual, that's like me, right? And the team, the people that I'm working with. Help me understand what you mean by the mission and context. Help me understand those facets.
So again, I was looking for something that talked about, depending on the context, what are the fundamental principles that could apply to the point, like, so that they could apply to 14th century Mongolia just as easy as 21st century Taipei. So the context really does drive the leadership, but we're trying to get the essence of what it is that people do in that context. So it's anchored in the context. It isn't just leadership for leadership's sake. It's anchored in the context.
So it depends on the situation.
It does. It's
Yeah.
contextualizing leadership depending on the situation. However, when we talk about the context, there's a sense-making capability that all leaders have to help people understand the context. So if you're in the middle of the French Revolution, how do you make sense of that group of people? If you're in the middle of a technological revolution, how do you make sense of that situation? And so there's
the
an
context
element.
actually impacts the way in which you lead because it impacts the people that you're trying to lead. Am I getting that correctly?
Indeed, right. And so although the context shifts, there are still some competencies that the leader has to do. And in my model, that's sense making, but there's still competencies that leaders have to do, which is about, making sense of the world today as it is. What are the rules of engagement? What are the forces that are going on? And helping them understand it for themselves, for the leader, but also to paint a picture and to tell a story for the wider organization or the wider group. And so the mission you asked about, that's the same. Once you galvanize a group of people to build a better future or to build a better tomorrow, we need to understand, what is the mission? What are we looking to do? What is the output that we're looking to accomplish? And if we have that North Star, and we have a group of people who are willing to do the work, then we can accomplish mighty things.
Yeah, I love what you said there. You said it's helping make sense, right? So I think what I'm getting here is it's part of the leader's responsibility is to help us make sense of what it is, the mission, the purpose, the goal that we're trying to accomplish, in the context, the situation, the resources, the abilities that we have in order to accomplish that mission or that goal. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And so, if you like, I can just walk through those 4 dimensions, and we'll talk about Seneca as being the third one, right? Because the first dimension is about as being a role model, right? And so again, we got to be careful with words here because it can be very easy to go down a rabbit hole. But words are the tools that we use to communicate, because I could say role model and that would mean something very different for you than it does for me. I could talk about the competencies, because the model is that I use right now. I have there's a CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership, has a custom 360 that uses my leadership model and their database, which is one of the largest databases of leadership competencies in the world. And so when I talk about competencies, it's using that language because it's into their model, but just with a caveat. Like when I say a role model is made up of being consistency and integrity, right? That's what a leader has to showcase, consistency and integrity. Those can mean very different things for different people. In my case, it's really about how are you showing up as a leader, right? We're looking for consistent behaviors. We're looking to understand, do you share the values? Are you going to advocate for the organization or for the people within it? Can I count on you to be consistent around your behaviors? Because if I can't, I'm probably not going to come on a journey with you.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of some of the bosses that I've had and trying to identify the consistent behavior, that the role model behavior, that's just consistency and integrity. What would I see to help me see that, yeah, this leader is a good role model?
Yeah. And so number one would be, is there something in them that I aspire to? That's one of the, the gold standard tests. So is there something in that leader that I aspire to? Do they share the values of the organization? Do they advocate for the people in the organization? Do they model the type of things that we want to see, right? And so, like I said, integrity could mean different things for different people, right?
Right.
Because you could be part of an organization that has very different goals and settings from another one. If you're in a nonprofit, or if you're, they're all different types of organizations we have. But that integrity piece is about, are you sharing the values? Are you shaping the values of the people? And do I, as one of the followers, want to be more like you? Do you unlock something in me that's aspirational? And if yes, then you are being a role model.
And so because I think sorry, Jamie, it reminds me of some of the great leaders that I've had, and you're dead on there. I think of them and I think, yeah, these are people that made me want to emulate them. I wanted to be like them. And so I love that they're a good role model for me in my leadership journey.
And so what we're looking for is somebody who's sort of centered and anchored, right? They're very comfortable with, they're not, they don't change with the wind. They're not, changing the decision-making or changing the way that they're showing up, because that's confusing for a follower and that's difficult to want to follow.
Yeah.
And so, there's a chapter in the book I talk about, like, you've got to do the inner work. You've got to create the space for leadership. So in this realm, there's a chapter that talks about how do you create the space for you to do the evaluation. And so, in the world that we live in, when we're talking about the leadership development, it's about How do I assess? How am I perceived? How do I see the world? How does the world see me? And just being centered and anchored around who I am, what the values are of the organization that I'm representing, what the values are of the people, and how do I walk that fine line? How do I stay within that, paradigm and stay consistent in how I show up as a behaviors? Because if not, you imagine if you and I were going to follow somebody who said we're going on a 3-week journey and we weren't sure, like on week 2, that we'd be doing something very, very differently, we're probably not going to sign up for it.
Yeah. I'm loving what I'm hearing here. It's a lot of, for the leader, for them, in order for them to be consistent and have integrity, they really need to understand themselves, understand what their values, the organization's values, make sure that they're meshing so that they can be consistent. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. And so a lot of times the advice I just say to people is you've got to make space to do the inner work. Right? Because where you don't have that, we can find leaders who are they want to get into the role, but they don't know who they are. And so a lot of times I'm doing work with people who have had this objective in their mind to be in a certain title or role or position, but they don't know who they are. And so what it means is that they're inconsistent in how they show up. They're not thinking about how am I showing up to the rest of the community that I'm here to, to lead and inspire.
What does that look like for a leader to make space and try to better understand themselves? Because I know I've seen some leaders who don't have a clear sense of who they are and don't even know that they don't have that sense. How does a leader get to that point?
Well, of course, I'm an executive coach, so I'm going to say, I'm going to advocate for having an executive coach, but there are many different ways that we can just, create awareness for ourselves. And so number one, you want to create the space, because you can't have these deeper insights about who you are and how you're showing up without having some space. But after that, it's really about getting feedback from the environment, understanding your own narrative and journey, your own storyline, and then realizing where there might be things that you do before you do them that would appear out of alignment. And so, like I said, it's being centered and anchored and aligned about who you are, and hoping that modeling those behaviors is going to inspire others to not necessarily to be like you, but to unlock their better selves.
Yeah, I love that. So really make sure that you have the time and the energy to focus on understanding yourself, getting that feedback, and making sure that you are managing and thinking through of your activities so that you can really determine whether they're consistent with the values that you have. I love this approach.
Indeed. And so then let me move to the second dimension then, which is about the group or the team, right? So here, the way I describe it is being a community builder, and the competencies around that are about effective communications and also being focused on others, right? Because if I could do it on my own, I can just be a solopreneur or I can just be a subject matter expert. But if I'm galvanizing a group of people to build a better future, I have to spend some time focusing on them. And so, the dimensions are communication and focus on others. But really, in the team setting, I spend a lot of time with folks working on, do you understand the motivations of your team? Do you understand the capabilities and competencies within your team, right? Because, a lot of times, and we talked about this last time, the mistakes that we make as leaders sometimes is to think that other people think and act and are motivated the way that we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when that doesn't happen, we can get really unintended consequences, right? So, if people are motivated, there's lots of different motivations that we could, if I think about the Hogan that has a whole list of different ways that people are motivated, whether it's socially or people-oriented or decision-making, there's lots of different ways that people can be motivated. If you only see things through your lens, you will only typically surround yourself or get the best out of people who see the world the same way.
Yeah, I'm loving this approach as well, because I think it's really talking about how to be that community builder, you really have to understand each individual in your community and understand who they are and what motivates them, right? You have to have a sense of their perspective and appreciate that.
And so that speaks to our sense of belonging. So this is the human sense, the driver that underpins it. It doesn't mean that you're trying to satisfy people all the time, right? Because that sometimes would be inconsistent. We come back to being a role model. You realize that with every decision, you're not going to make everybody happy.
Right.
But it may be about sort of preempting that with groups that you know are going to be dissatisfied, right? Or taking on inputs that you may not otherwise consider to make sure that there may not be we may not change the what we're going to do, but we may change how we're going to do it if we understand how our team is motivated, what the capabilities and competencies are, and how aligned they are going to be in what we're doing.
Yeah. This is one of the interesting things that I think is really valuable in the model is understanding the balance that needs to occur, because as you are the role model and remaining consistent and having your integrity. You're also understanding your team, and you're building that community, understanding who they are, what's important to them, and balancing what's important to them versus what's important to you, and making sure that you remain, consistent with your things while trying to bring in that community. I think that's delicate balance that needs to occur there.
Yeah. And I think it's really underpinned on, the premise I work with people on is just being careful not to judge. Because when we judge somebody who has a different motivation from us, number one is that we can make them feel excluded. And so that disrupts this sense of belonging. But also it means it's more likely that they're going to step back instead of stepping in. And if we want everybody performing at their best, we need to make them feel comfortable that their actions are appreciated and valued and respected. And so the leader's role is to create the conditions for people to feel that sense of belonging, that this is the group that I want to do great work with. And sometimes we decide what that great work is once we have the group. And sometimes we decide what the great work is and then we build the group. More often than not, it's a combination of both. But if you're not thinking about what are the motivations and capabilities of the team in a non-judgmental way, and then finding ways to evolve them. So we're not just talking about inspiring them as a role model. We're talking about evolving their capabilities as a community builder, pushing people and challenging them privately or publicly in a constructive way to be better, individually and collectively. Then we're building the unit of action, which is the team, right? They translate your energy and your motivation into action. They translate the invisible things that are going on inside of your head into something concrete and real.
Yeah.
They are the unit of action. And so if we don't understand that really well, we can come unstuck pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of underpinnings of making sure that you're respecting other people in terms of who they are and where they're at, and accepting them as they are, right? And that belonging requires you to accept people as they are. Am I getting those undertones correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's even more valuable today, right? I think it's even more something that making people feel included and accepted, I think, has really come to the forefront. I think that's a more powerful motivator than maybe it was previously.
Yeah.
But I think that there's always been this underpinning of creating a group of people that somebody would want to belong to. That is just recognizing our common values and our common objectives and our commonality, our humanism, our collective humanism.
Yeah.
Even that is something that can be compelling and motivating.
And even that, when you said creating a team that someone would want to belong to, that even speaks to engagement, right? If someone wants to belong to a team, they're more likely to be engaged in that team and its activities. So I think all of that connects really well together.
And so the best definition of that, if we move on to the third dimension, which is the context, right, the sense maker. And so so what we talk about in sense maker is competencies are intelligence, and that's cognitive, social, and emotional intelligence at its best, and then also a learning orientation. So typically the great leaders I work with will have both of those things. And so sense making, as we talked about earlier, is about explaining the context, but also as a leader, and this is one of my, my experiences as chief exec for a period of time, that you might get team members who say, hey, Jamie, listen, I don't think this person's playing well, with us, and I didn't like the way that they did this.
Yeah.
And so if you don't understand the motivations and competencies of those individual team members, you might just say, well, here's a decision, and you get them out of your office and you say, okay, I'm done. But actually, a great sense maker is going to say, this is a really good opportunity for me to both help other people understand the motivation of the team, but also to make sense of what great looks like. And it doesn't look like everybody being the same and everybody doing the same. And sometimes it might look like dynamic tension between disciplines or between functions or between people or between parts of the organization. But that's okay. Like, how do we tolerate that? Because unlocking that, respecting each other, and seeing each other as valuable and whole, even though we may have very different perspectives. If the leader can help facilitate that as part of the storytelling that you do as a sense maker, then you can create a sense of meaning for the group that actually doubles down on, yes, I want to belong to this group, and this group helps me make sense of the world.
Yeah. So that leader really needs to, first starting with themselves, be someone who is open to different perspectives, open to different orientations, and then also needs to have the ability to help other people become open as well in that team, right? So it's not just about the leader being open, it's about the leader helping the team members be open and respecting each other's different perspectives. That's really an interesting approach there.
Yeah, and so even with, I think the concept of disagree and commit has been talked about a lot, right? But the leader, we're helping somebody to understand where you can have two different opinions, right? But but we can still disagree and move forward in a way that, that doesn't make anybody feel diminished. That's part of the sense-making role as well as the community building role. And so that's inside the organization within the team, but also part of the leader's role is, as we talked earlier on, is to understand the context. Like what's going on? What are these forces at work? And so today that might mean, what does AI mean for me in my function? And as a leader, you have to be knowledgeable enough. You have to have a learning orientation. You have to have the cognitive, social, and emotional intelligence to help somebody to understand something like that. That's just one of many different examples. But if you can do that well in a way that people leave your presence feeling like they've understood something better, or they've got something to think about, or they've got something to go and research or go and deploy themselves, then you're doing the great work of leadership. Most people will say, hey, I've got a decision I hear, and I need you to, this is the decision I need you to take, and I need you to just go and do it, and then it's done. But actually, when somebody comes to you with a challenge, that represents an amazing opportunity for you to tell a story, to help make sense. And so part of the leader, there's a chapter in the book around storytelling, like how we tell stories about ourselves and about others and about the organization or the world that we live in, and about the future that we're going to go and create.
That's a unique way of looking at it, seeing for leaders to see challenges as opportunities, right? To see the challenge as an opportunity to mold and help to shape the team and its response to that challenge and move forward to success. And that really requires the leader to understand the challenge, understand, as you said, like the cognitive ability to really understand what that issue is, understand how people are responding to it emotionally, how it's making people feel and how it might impact their behavior, and then helping them to figure out how they can reframe that challenge and see it in a positive way in terms of, we don't all have to agree, but we can still move forward, right? And so moving forward through success through that challenge. I like that way of looking at a challenge as an opportunity.
And, in the absence of time, most people don't think in those terms. And that's part of it. You're trying to create some space and time for people to be able to reflect and say, this is an opportunity. But if I have to get out of that meeting and there's a decision to be made, I'm more likely to just say, here's the decision, go and implement it, and we're done. Where people are not really understood or they're not connected to what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And so again, the leader being able to understand or see those opportunities, or see those moments as an opportunity to help explain and tell a story about, what's going on, or, how somebody else might be motivated, or what the invisible forces are that are at play. That's sense-making at its finest. It's storytelling at a highest level.
Yeah. I think we said something about how the leader doesn't always feel like they have the time, and so they make these snap decisions. And I can understand, because, we've all been in that position where, you were a CEO where you just feel like you have 1,000 things to do and you don't have the time to sit down and explain to things. But I like the way that you've designed it, in that explaining that there's value in taking time to do that because of the outcome of the positive output that results in taking that time. And so it's not a waste of time, it's an investment in time in doing that.
Indeed. Right. So we're sort of front loading the conversation. And a very visceral way, a very easy way to explain this is, imagine if my kids come in and they're arguing and I just say, can you stop arguing? What I've done is press their ability to help me to understand what's the debate that's at play here, and to help them to understand both each other and the context and what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And so if I see activities like that in my team, it's a very similar situation. Is if I have the time and I see the opportunity, I can use that then as a way of helping to make sense and to coalesce this group. Not in terms of the connections amongst each other, but also the values or the principles that we might have, or what the forces are that are going on in the world, or how we're going to combat them, or how we're going to mitigate those forces collectively.
Yeah. I've seen this play out in the workplace. This is a great example where you talk about conflict in the workplace, right? A lot of leaders, are afraid of conflict in the workplace and don't know how to deal with it because it can be disruptive. But the way that you're describing and the way that this model is approaching that's actually a good thing, because it's an opportunity to teach your teammates how to communicate, how to better understand each other, and how to move forward despite the differences in opinion or the different challenges that may occur. So that's a positive thing. That is a positive outcome. So in that sense, if a leader reframes the conflict in that way, it can really be a very helpful thing instead of a negative thing that a lot of leaders are afraid of.
And if we tack into this learning orientation, sometimes the leader can say, listen, I don't know what the answer is here. Why don't we figure it out together? or I don't know what's going on here. Why don't you figure it out and come back to me, right?
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't have to be made in that moment. It's just understanding, what are the dynamics? What's the dynamic tension that's going on? Why is that happening? And how can I help evolve people's thinking so that they understand the situation as well as I do, or that we all understand better?
Yeah. So Jamie, let's talk a little bit about what happens when a leader doesn't do this, right? What do we see? What are the behaviors? What are the consequences when a leader doesn't engage in some of these behaviors?
Yeah, well, I think, if I would just take a very personal example, right? I walk in my boss's office and somebody has been doing something that's irritated me for a long time. And I might think I might attribute some kind of motivation to that. They're trying to get resources, or they're trying to showcase their skills, they're trying to diminish what I'm doing. And so I'm in my leader's office saying, you have to fix this thing over there.
Yeah.
And I'm not leaving until you do. And if the leader says, hey, Jamie, stop making a big deal about this, just get on with your work.
Yeah.
Right? That's going to be a very different conversation than somebody says, hey, Jamie, listen, I hear what you're saying, but can you understand this person is not motivated necessarily. I told them they need to do this, right? Or the circumstances may call for this. Or actually, there's an opportunity for you to partner if you see them differently. And then, then that person can let me go about and say, oh, okay, I see the world differently now. Thank you for that. You've helped me to understand both myself and the context better. And we might end up with a better solution.
Yeah. So when the leader doesn't take the time to do that, like in that example, they're minimizing your feelings and your emotions, right? Which makes you feel like you're not appreciated and can, result in you, acting out behaviorally. So I see the consequences, some of these unintended consequences, and some of these consequences that leaders may not think about, right? If they don't think through the entire steps and the entire process.
I could disengage. I can feel like there's injustice, everything up to, including, you talked about poor performance or poor behaviors on my part. But I could actually decide that this is an organization I don't want to be around because people aren't listening to me.
Yeah.
And a very clear example that I have, when I, from my experience in the workplace, was, and again, I think I may have mentioned this last time we spoke, but just, people who may come in and they do their work, and I have somebody who would do their work, but they wouldn't do any of the extracurriculars. Listen, this person's not committed. Why aren't they coming to do the thing? And so there was this tension that they felt like it's unjust that this person still has the same title, or they still get the same recognition that I do, but they're not going above and beyond. Well, as it turns out, they had different motivations about what work meant to them. And so with the way me as a leader, I could honor both of those things. It's not about, for them, it wasn't about advancement. It was about a personal situation that they needed to take care of. And they needed those extracurricular those times to be able to deal with something that was going on in their life. And so for that, if I can respect and honor that, and I can help other people understand what they're going through, we might end up with a better solution where I have less dissonance in my team. I have a highly motivated person because I'm giving them what they need. And also, we want people understanding each other better.
Yeah, and in that example, I can see that leader really needed to be that community builder, right? They needed to focus on other people and understand who those people were, what their motivations were, as well as be that sense maker of making sense of that situation and helping the rest of the team understand that person's experience. I can see how the model applies in that setting there.
Yeah, and so none of these things are independent and discrete. You can see that they're all connected in the model shape. The leader connects all of these things, and you can be doing all 3 or 4 of these things in any one given conversation. You can be modeling the behaviors you want. You can be helping people to build community. You can helping them to make sense, and then also saying, oh, and by the way, once you've figured that out, guess what? This is how we're going to make it better once you guys have figured this out. But if you don't take the time to deal with those moments or to see those as opportunities to help align your team, then you just perform suboptimally. That's all.
Yeah.
You might still get us a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It has those consequences in terms of employee performance, rights, and productivity. So I think that absolutely makes sense that a leader really needs to be thinking about these things. This is such a great model, and I can see how it applies in the workplace for leaders and the impact on the employees and the organization. Where does one start? Right, because we've talked about the model. Where do I start if I want to start today? How do we get started on this?
Well, let me just finally just touch on the future shaper, right? So the piece what they speak to, the competencies around future shaper are a vision and a bias for action. Mm-hmm. And so you can have the other 3, but unless you're able to, like we talked about storytelling around sense making, but I have to build a compelling vision for where we're going. And so the storytelling element of sense making actually then weaves into the future shaping. So a vision and a bias for action. And so what does that speak to? We spoke to our sense of self, our sense of belonging, and our sense of meaning. But this really speaks to a sense of purpose, right? We're giving up something to our leaders because they can help us have a sense of purpose around building something that's bigger than ourselves. And there is something human. When I did all the research and look back through history, there is something that we all want to be part of, something that's bigger than ourselves. And so, giving us something to dream about, giving us something to live for, giving us a reason to get up in the morning, that's part of what a leader does. And so, where do you start? Well, I think there's an element of understanding what is it that's important for me, right, individually. And it may not be within an organizational construct, or we may choose that we're happy to follow in that context and we want to lead in a different context, right? So it may be something in your community. It may be something that doesn't have to be, what we read about on the news. We're just looking at how will you build a better future? And it might be I'm working with my municipality on something, or I'm at the town council, right? I don't have to be in a high-level leadership role. But it would be about, so number one is crafting the vision or what's important to you. Mm-hmm. And then understanding, is this something that I can do on my own, or do I need a group of people? And then in doing so, we think about what are the values? How am I going to show up? What are the people who are in the team? Are they the right team to get me where I need to go? How am I going to build stories and tell stories in the sense-making role about what this future is going to look like? And then we go to work.
Yeah. I love this model, Jamie. I think this is a great model. And I want to talk a little bit about your book. Tell us about your book, Let's Go, How Great Leaders Shape the Future, because this model is in that book and you've got some very concrete steps and actions to help leaders, accomplish some of these goals. So tell us about when we can get this book, where is it available?
Yeah, so the book comes out, the launch date is May 14th, 2024. And so you can pre-order it on Amazon. You can get it through a number of different book retailers, and I think you can put that in the show notes, the links if we need to. Yeah, so it's available May 14th, and so hopefully there's already a number of people who've put their pre-orders down, and I'm hoping that it resonates with the group. Certainly, my intention was to write something that's universal and timeless that we could still read and could still be applicable in 10, 15, 20 years' time. It's certainly, been relevant for me in the way that I coach and help leaders for the last 20 years. And so, I'm hoping that people can get their hands on it.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, thanks for coming on the show and doing that deep dive in the model for us. I think that was really very helpful. I enjoyed learning more about it, and I think it's such a great model for leaders to try to emulate and follow. So I appreciate you coming on the show and walking us through it.
Well, thank you for having me back. There's a copy on its way to you, so you get to explore it a bit deeper. And thank you so much for having me back, Ernest. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. And for everyone else, the book is called Let's Go, How Great Leaders Shape the Future by Jamie Ramsden. Please go out and get it. It's a great book. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope you will join us again next time.